Hello again, guys. I am so excited that you stayed because this is the money shot for this whole conference. I mean, these guys are cyber royalty, right? I mean, cyber royalty. So, Mr. Marc Crudgington, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you, Laura. Name is Marc Crudgington. As Kim said, I'm the CEO, founder, and vCIO, vCISO for CyberFore Systems. Previous to that, I was the CISO and SVP of Information Security Data Privacy at Woodforest National Bank. I'm an alum of the CISO Academy at FBI, and also author of a cybersecurity book called The Coming Cyber War, What Executives, the Board, and You Should Know.
And one of my cyber heroes. Okay, next.
Hello, my name's David Mata. I'm the Global Head of Incident Management at Darktrace. I've been with the company for about 7 years. Prior to Darktrace, I was at CIA for about 12 years, focusing on cyber offensive operations. Then I spent some time at Goldman Sachs, so happy to meet you guys.
So I guess I've already been introduced. James Morrison, currently National Cybersecurity Specialist for Intelisys, which is a brokerage for suppliers and sales. Was a CISO for a company called Entirety for about 6 months. Worked for HPE here in Houston for a while, and then by claim to fame. 22 years FBI service, 30 years of federal service, 8 years here in Houston, 14 in Albuquerque. So I did technology before they called it what it call it today. So lots of stories. You'll see where we're going from here. So.
Okay, if you're ready, first question that we have for the panel is going to be directed to Mr. Mata, and it goes like this. Talk to us about the role of AI in ransomware and respond and recover.
Sure, sounds good.
Hold it, now you might need to use my hands.
Okay. So before we talk about ransomware and the role of AI and whatnot, it's good to understand that if we're having a conversation about ransomware, it's a little too late, right? So there was a good discussion earlier about ransomware indicators and those type of things, and I think somebody earlier asked about what are some good indicators of ransomware. So we've worked on plenty of ransomware playbooks, and the statistics say that a large percentage of ransomware are tied to early indicators of compliance, right? Some of those things that people shouldn't be doing, like streaming, downloading movies, those type of things, right? So it's best to kind of get in front of it, right, and actually detect those things and stop them, right? There are going to be situations where it's a little bit faster than that. There's going to be some situations where the ransomware is not deployed on schedule, or at least not to your schedule. It'll always be on the attacker's schedule, right? And they look for off hours, holidays, after hours, those type of things, right? And for those type of situations, you're going to need something that's automated that actually works at machine speed, right? So with AI, we're actually looking at behavioral-based anomalies, right? Should my laptop be scanning the whole network? Should my laptop be touching every file system on the network? No, right? And so with AI and machine learning, we can actually look at the behavior of that particular device. And if there's an anomaly, it can actually enforce pattern of life. And this happens at machine speed. It happens fast. And hopefully by the time you come in the morning, everything's still where you left it.
Yeah, so we were having a conversation out in the foyer, and we were talking about AI and machine learning, and those are sometimes overused. Let's be honest. If we've been around tech for a while, we've been hearing all about some of these buzzwords, and I think what we're looking at mainly is the ability to learn and the ability to recognize patterns that maybe we wouldn't see in a human level, right? There's a statistic that says, so Verizon goes out with its DBIR every year, the data breach investigation report. And they said that the biggest threat to your environment is credentials. and credential theft. First thing, right? There's also a study that shows that when a credential is stolen, it will be manually accessed within 12 hours of being stolen. So think about that. Somebody behind a keyboard says, oh, I found this credential, and they're going to try to log into your environment. That's where when we start looking at AI and we start looking at the ability to, we call it miraculous travel. Have you ever seen this where they logged in from Houston and then 4 hours later they logged from Singapore? Well, unless they're on a VPN, that's not reality. And so it's too fast now. Every one of you has things in your environment right now, security tools, but think about how challenged your IT staffs are right now with the number of alerts you have. I'm going to show another statistic. 98% of companies that are hit with ransomware already have tools in place, right? They already have firewalls, they already have XDR, they already have the tools, and then they come to people like me and they go, I don't understand what happened. Because it's not about the tools, it's about how quickly can you react to the event that's occurring. And so time on target, right, or 15-minute response times, most of the companies you'll be dealing with are going to have very small IT staffs that aren't working after hours, and you might have a 12-hour or an 18-hour response time if you detect the anomaly. And that's where things like machine learning and AI come in, is that we've got to start thinking about, how do I make my guys' jobs and ladies' jobs easier? More panes of glass don't make the job easier. So 12 tools means I have to switch between tool after tool after tool, and if I miss something, you're going to be out of luck. So it's a big challenge, and I think that's the reason we're seeing enhanced growth into things like AI and machine learning.
Yeah, I would also add to that, they're all spot on, or James and David are spot on, but the AI can also be used to prevent it from getting to your inbox as well. So, some sophisticated email security tools have AI based, and they're out crawling the web and then shutting down things as well. The other part of AI that comes in handy, we all know clicking on the links, humans are the worst part of this. There are security awareness tools that have AI built in and can get more difficult as the user's knowledge progresses as well. So that's another area to look at.
I gotta rein it back in here. Okay, talking about another really sexy word, zero trust. Okay, means different things to different people. How does one get started on their zero trust journey? I'm gonna start with Mark.
Yeah, this is a very interesting topic, and as Laura alluded to, zero trust means something different to everyone. You ask 10 different people, you're gonna get 10 different answers. The way I believe you start is like any problem that you have. First of all, you define the problem, the scope of the problem, and then what you want to accomplish out of that. And then start one area at a time. It's not one of those things where you can boil the ocean, but really understand your capabilities. Chances are you're doing some form of zero trust right now with access, but maybe you need to take it a step further and start with some quick wins. Obviously, you have to get executives on board with some kind of monstrous type program that zero trust can be. But I would take a look at your environment, start with what you already have, and then lay out a roadmap to eventually get full on zero trust across your environment, or where you think you need to. Sometimes you may not need it, and if the risk is not high enough, why go there?
So I agree, like everybody else. It means different things to different people, right? But I'm going to take it a little more high level than that. I've had numerous conversations with clients about zero trust and whatnot, and I always start by asking, do you have a security policy? And the answer is no. So I said, okay, why don't we start there? And maybe we can start to enforce that, right? And once you can enforce that security policy, then we can enhance it. And then you can start to ask yourself, should the guest Wi-Fi be able to speak directly to our production servers or the CEO laptop? If the answer is no, maybe we start to segment that and those type of things.
Yeah, I feel like it's another word for what we call defense in depth for many, many years, right? Defense in depth, you're building layers of attack. Here's what's interesting about criminals, and I saw this through my time, right? Criminals are lazy. I mean, what's also kind of cool about the Verizon report is it says if a criminal has to take more than 3 or 4 steps, they're not going to do it. So what you're doing is you're adding additional layers of them. They're going to go, ugh, this is a pain in the butt. I'm not going to do it. So that's part of the zero trust. And I think what we're also kind of alluding to is, do you even know what you need? Please don't jump to zero trust if you've got much bigger vulnerabilities that are just sitting there. Have you done a pen test? Do you have an incident response plan? Have you have a disaster recovery plan? Have you tested them? And then have you done a vulnerability assessment? If you've got an unpatched, Log4j server, zero trust may not help. Let's be honest here, right? That's the problem is that we overlook sometimes the really obvious vulnerability, and then we think something like zero trust is going to save our bacon. It just doesn't work that way. Here we were talking about patching before, and I'm going to add this to pen testing. I had a company that came to me and they said, we had a pen test done last year. I was like, okay. And it showed these vulnerabilities. I'm like, good. And then they said, we had another one done this year, and they said the same vulnerabilities existed. And I was like, why did you do 2 pen tests? Well, we were required by compliance. So they were required to do the pen test, but nowhere in their mind did they think that I also have to patch and fix the vulnerabilities found by it. And so there's an insanity that we all sort of fall under sometimes. Let's slow it down, fix the critical, fix the high, then we can worry about mediums and lows, maybe. I know a lot of companies can't even get there, and it depends on the ingestion you can take care of in your IT staff. All the way down.
All the way back to... Okay, we're going to rock it back the opposite direction. Collaboration. It has been said, friends don't let friends get hacked. How do we collaborate and integrate between organizations, between tools? How do we keep ourselves tight? And who would like to start?
I'll start, because you got my quote.
Yeah.
That's been my quote. Friends don't let friends get hacked, right? You're dealing with customers right now that are people that you've dealt with for years upon years upon years. They often don't know that you also can talk and help them talk through security. One of the things we talked about is, in the FBI was InfraGard, and we pushed it and jammed it, and Houston's got a great InfraGard program, but it's also about information sharing about the vulnerabilities. We were laughing about, do you know that the bad guys collaborate? We watch, that was one thing we in the FBI and the CIA and NSA watch, we watched those conversations, and we could see hackers from many different countries in there exchanging tools. And we'd capture the tools and we'd take them apart, and then we'd send out a warning saying, hey, there's a new tool coming. And people go, how do you know? I'm the FBI, I know exactly where that data came from. But we don't collaborate. We feel like we don't want to say something because it's like, it might reflect upon us, upon I did something bad. We were talking about how people will click on a phishing link and then they'll go, ooh, I don't want to tell anybody I did that. Or they send money inadvertently to somebody and they're like, oh, I don't want to say anything. Here's the problem with sending money. If you can, in 36 hours, I can stop any financial transaction anywhere in the world. You got to encourage the people that are doing financial transactions in your environment to absolutely say, I made a mistake as soon as possible, and don't beat them. No beatings allowed, because you want to keep an error where they come to us and say, hey, I did this, I messed up, fix it. We had one lady here in town, this company transferred $300,000 to Singapore. Their lawyer was there in 2 hours, sent a restraining order to the bank in Singapore and froze that account. Done. They got their money back, 95%, right? So it's very important to make sure those kind of rules are in place. Encourage collaboration. Encourage it not just between others in the same environment, but internal. Don't beat people. Actually come up with a positive way to reinforce people that say, I made a mistake.
So just to play on to your quote, I live in the incident management, crisis management world, right? And the one message I want to pass to you guys is that the security vendors in your stack can be friends too. Or it can be forced friendship. And I guess what I mean by that is, when we support a client, I always ask, who else is on your security stack? Is CrowdStrike on there, Malwarebytes, those type of things? And I'll be the first one to say, why don't we all get in a Zoom and collaborate, right? And I've had some clients say, I don't think this vendor will want to do that. I don't think that vendor will want to do that. And I have to remind them, you're the boss. if they want a renewed contract, they're going to do exactly what you tell them. Forced friendship. And so what I've seen is that the response time to fully remediate client is actually sliced in half, right? Because now we're all talking, we all have different visibility, we all have things we can add and collaborate.
Yeah, the easiest way to collaborate is join organizations that are built for collaboration. That would be like InfraGard, which is ISACs, ISALs, other associations. All the threat feeds that you're getting, there's some form of collaboration that's being done there. Many times it's individual companies that are sending out these IOCs as well. So I would get involved and get involved in your community as well is a good way to collaborate. And some kind of partner group or peer group.
Okay, a question came up, and it said, what are the best techniques to speak in terms of risk and ROI so that I don't sound like techno-babble, and so that it doesn't sound like I'm buying toys, but rather tools? How do we speak in terms of risk and ROI for our cyber investments? I'll turn it back to you.
The easiest way is to speak in risk and ROI and not tech talk. I mean, that's pretty simple. But if you're talking, if the question was really directed toward like, how do I translate cyber to my board or executive management, you have to understand the language that they speak and really maybe look at some of those board reports or something and how do they may do it in charts, graphs, whatever, but it's very simple. Use scorecards. Those are a good way as well. But it's as simple as just speak in terms of risk. And a lot of times executives and the board, they like numbers as well. So if you can put some kind of ROI or why the risk is this high or what that means in terms of a quantitative value, that certainly helps. Especially if everybody should understand like what the cost of a breach is or a breach record, you know, depending on the industry, that number can be different. But translate that, and maybe you do a minimal breach, a medium-sized breach, and a high breach. But just put it in numbers or put it in the board language, executive language that they can understand.
So when I was at Goldman, you know, we would have meetings with the higher ups, and we talked about lateral movement, compromises, and they would look at us like, what is all that, right? So we learned that we had to speak their language, right? And their language is cost, reputational damage, and those type of things, right? So if you want to articulate risk to your board, you gotta show some metrics. You gotta show that there's potential reputational damage to the company and what that means to them as well.
Yeah, and I teach students that executive summary, right? 1 page. Don't get more than that, right? So whatever you're going to do, you got to keep it clear and concise and in language that speaks to what they know. The other thing I would say is that understand who you report to when you start looking up your chain of command. CISOs and CIOs are about an even split between former IT managers and somebody else checking a box to get on the C board, right? I've run into a lot of CISOs and CIOs that they're finance people, and they're just trying to get up to that CEO role, so they go through the CIO or the CISO role, right? Not much is CISO anymore. But like when I was a CISO, I said, who do I report to? I reported to a CTO. So that means that I'm thinking more technology. But if I had reported to a CFO or a chief legal officer, chief risk officer, it changes the conversation by knowing the audience. So it's critically important to know who you're talking to and who's the real decision maker in that place. If you're trying to get a product, if you're trying to get like a new firewall, and you're going to your chief financial officer, they don't care. They don't know about next-gen firewalls or why Fortinet's different than Palo Alto and it's different way. They're like, why am I spending X dollars on this product and I already have a firewall, and if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? That's the thought process that's constantly going on in their brain. So you've got to say it's broken or it's old or it's no longer supported. They like that one. No longer any patch support by the vendor. They like that one. Oh, and I have vulnerabilities. So make sure you're turning it in that way so that they understand why the old is bad, why new is good. It's that basic when it gets down to it.
Okay, we are talking about all these sexy cyber terms. Another one, enrichment. Enrichment. What does it mean? Why is it important? And how do we do it?
I'll let the data guy go on this.
Dave's favorite word.
So this is another word that it means different things to different people, right? So to me, enrichment is collaboration at the technical level, right? So that means that if I'm offering a security product, you should be asking yourself, can't it integrate with the rest of the security stack? By feeding in Defender logs or Cisco logs or NetFlow logs and those type of things, how does that help me? How does that help my product? How does that help your security stack, right? Because if you have 100 different security products and they don't talk to each other, you have a really hard job.
Yeah, we were talking about, I said, it's like elevated on Chopped. If they want them to elevate a dish on Chopped, and it sends chills up my spine. Enrichment, yeah, so what's the point, right? Data. If we're thinking about, and especially from cybersecurity, why do I need the data? Because there's some sort of element of intelligence within that data, something that I need to use. Now, 90% of the data we collect on our network is unstructured. Think about, right? So all of the sensors, especially if you get an IoT is almost all unstructured. So what I got to do is I got to be able to massage it and ingest it into something. A SIM, into a SOAR, into a SOC, whatever you've got, and it's got to be usable. But this is the problem we have right now, is that there isn't really a standardization amongst products. Now, there's an effort right now, we were talking a little bit about it, there is an effort amongst cybersecurity products to create a language that all of them speak. But until then, if I've got QRadar, or I've got Logarithm, or I've got Splunk as a SIM, as an ingestion mechanism, every one of them will require something slightly different from different XDRs. So I got CrowdStrike and I got Carbon Black, and every one of them generates different data, has to be manipulated and normalized to be ingested in. It's a really big pain in the butt, right? So understand why we're talking about enriching the data. What's my purpose, right? If I know what my purpose is, then that allows me to then, I will say, normalize the data. That's my favorite word as a computer scientist, right? I'll normalize the data so that I can ingest it into the proper, mechanism.
Yeah, simply just making the data actionable and usable, I guess. Yeah, I mean.
Okay, we'll just keep this thing going. Thank you guys for having kind of caught up with me in the afternoon with a few questions here. Very interesting ones. GLBA, CCPA, SHIELD Act. How is compliance changing the world of cybersecurity?
Well, one of, James has a quote, I do too. You can be compliant and not secure. So one of the ways compliance is changing cybersecurity, it is just a checkbox. And people think once they check the box that they're good. But I think some other ways, and we'll allude to this in a little bit, that compliance is changing. It's forcing people to do things that they normally haven't done before and go just to a baseline, which surprisingly, there's a lot of companies out there that aren't even meeting the baselines. So it's good in that way, but it is bad in the way that, like I mentioned, that just because you're compliant doesn't mean you're secure. I think in some ways it's also forcing companies to think a little bit more with strategic type tools and more sophisticated tools, and then thinking of other things that they may need to add into the stack, such as cyber insurance. If you have to have certain tools, or you have to comply with cyber insurance, you might need additional tools in that to comply with certain regulations. Finance is big, regulations there, but look at things from a data privacy perspective as well, and not just secure, but how am I securing the data of customers? And there's a number of layers to that as well.
So to me, compliance is like high blood pressure, right? It's a silent killer, right? And like I mentioned earlier, right, based on the stats that we've looked at, most of the early indicators of ransomware starts with compliance. I think sometimes security teams are so fixated with looking for nation-state actors that they forget about the compliance. They overlook it and those type of things, right? I've had situations where clients, have been infected with ransomware and they come back to us and say, hey, why didn't you detect this? I'm like, we did 6 months ago. And here's like 300 breaches that prove that, right? So don't overlook it, stay on top of it.
Yeah, to Mark's point, I think compliance is going to drive a more enhanced conversation around security. What's kind of interesting is I talk to companies here in Texas, and they're like, well, why do I care about CCPA? Who knows what CCPA is? Raise your hand. The California Consumer Privacy Act does apply. If you have California citizens' data inside of your network and you suffer a breach, you can find yourself held accountable by the Attorney General of the state of California. Same with New York. Data privacy law, there's 12 states right now with data privacy laws, and it's expanding every year. And we sometimes don't think, well, our legislator ain't going to do it. Well, they changed the data breach notification laws last year. Anybody know that? I mean, so now if you suffer a breach, and I think it's like 1,000 people, you have to notify DIR. Nobody does it. Nobody's compliant with that. But so compliance, and when I did a presentation in New York City, they're terrified of the New York Shield Act. The tri-state area is really worried about what that looks like and what that's going to force. So compliance is starting to force a conversation about how do you secure the data. So GLBA, everybody knows what GLBA is? FinTech. But last year, the FTC came out and said that the Graham-Leach-Biley Act actually applies to car dealerships. Nobody knows that. And they have to be compliant by December of this year. And most car dealerships are like, what are you talking about? But think about that. What that means is that that's going to expand. Anybody who collects information like credit score, that you have a bank account someplace, will now have to probably start seeing GLBA start being pushed. So think about gym memberships, utility companies, anybody who collects information about your financial state, the customer's financial state, could become compliant. And I see this as expanding. I see it as a way that federal government expanding its reach into other areas. So I think you're going to see more compliance. Based upon midterms, I've also believed that we may see more of a federal privacy law, not as hard as GDPR, not as hard as the European law, but data privacy law is really gaining some steam on both sides of the aisle. So we got to understand that and understand the technology and the requirement that we might have around it.
Okay, another tasty subject here. Cyber insurance. Pros and cons of buying cyber insurance, and what are our thoughts on whether the insurers will pay if the perpetrator is a tacit representative of a nation state?
I'll send it on down. Yeah, this is so. Just we were talking about this last week. Lloyd's of London came out and said that if you have a cyber insurance policy with them and you suffer an attack from a nation state, they will not pay. Now, my question that came up was, well, what about a country like Russia, where the criminal organizations are operating with the tacit approval of their government, and they commit an attack against them at the behest of that leader? Is that a nation state? I don't like the fact that I feel like insurance companies could say, sure, and then you're going to have to sue them in order to get paid for it. There's multiple cases where cyber insurance policies don't pay if you don't do what you have to do, due diligence. So, first of all, I believe we need cyber insurance. However, I think we're also in a very interesting time in that cyber insurance providers have lost so much money because of ransomware over the last couple years that they're now realizing you're their customer. I can demand you do X, Y, and Z in order to get this insurance. And most cyber insurance providers are actually handing back. When you go in and say, I want new cyber insurance, they're saying, here's 29 things I want you to do. They're demanding these. And this is actually a conversation I have with my sales partners. They're like, well, I don't know how to get into cybersecurity. I said, just ask them about their cyber insurance policy. Have them go back and ask their insurer if they need more requirements. Multi-factor authentication, slam dunk. All insurance providers are requiring it. Incident response plan, disaster recovery plans, testing, pen tests. They're forcing it. And I actually did a presentation last week to some insurance providers that said, you have an opportunity here to drive technology implementation in cybersecurity. Because if you as there's only 6 underwriters in the United States. You know that? 6 underwriters. If all 6 of those underwriters colluded, they'd never do that, sure. If they all colluded together and said, we are requiring this for all of our underwriting, every company would have multi-factor authentication within a year. And I'm seeing the insurance companies saying we're not paying the ransom anymore. They're not going to do it. And so I think cyber insurance is still a must, but it's not the silver bullet that it used to be that, I got hit with ransomware, pay the insurance. Here's why insurance became the thing. I, as an IT company, don't have the budget, but my insurance, remember, it's all pots of money. Insurance comes from another pot of money. You can pay the insurance, but I can't pay the IT. It's a really bizarro thing, but we see many companies that falls into that. So it's an evolving market, but I think it's a must. But I think there's also opportunity from us, from a IT and cybersecurity sales. There's a huge opportunity coming if you're in some of those sectors that will be affected by cyber insurance.
Yeah, the cyber insurance is giving clients a false sense of security, like you said. I've talked to clients about, hey, talk to me about your security stack. I don't need one. I have cyber insurance. It doesn't work that way, right? Because there might be something in the fine line that you must have a certain type of security stack. Exactly, right? Another recommendation that I'll provide to you, and again, I sit on these calls daily, right? I'll jump on the call with the client, and there'll be a representative from the cyber insurance company. I'm not sure if that's a regulation, or maybe the client just wants to get ahead of it. And and what I've noticed is, some of the CISOs that I deal with, they take the approach of, well, if something managed to get through my defenses, must be nation state. That might not work to your advantage, because some of the fine print, like you said, if it's nation state, they're not going to pay for it. My advice to you, let your team do its job. Let the investigation take its place and whatnot. Then give the after action, report to the insurance company.
Yeah, and I don't know how many of you had to fill out cyber insurance forms to get insurance lately, but I used to fill them out, and when I was at Woodforest, and up until last year, there were 6 or 7 questions that I had to answer. And last year, the document was 7 pages long. So, and it was quite onerous. And I'm not sure if they would deny if you didn't have things, but I think they would probably make it so expensive that you would not want cyber insurance. And then you also have to look at, depending on your company, what your deductible is, because you may not suffer a cybersecurity incident that the deductible is more expensive than the actual breach itself and the loss of data that you may have. So those are things to look at as well.
Here, let me add one thing to that. So we were actually seeing ransomware groups actually diving into your insurance policies. So they're reading your policy, and they will actually bill you over what your insurance policy is, because they want money from you and the insurance company. So please recognize that, especially if your data is being breached and they're exfiltrating all the data, they're looking for the insurance policy along the way. So these guys aren't dumb. They want the maximum amount of money. And so if I can get some from you and from the insurance company, I win both ways.
I'm impressed that it suddenly worked. Okay, patching, easy to talk about, hard to do well. Any suggestions for the practitioners on patching and cyber hygiene?
Yeah, we had a fairly robust patching program at Woodforest. Of course, when I got there in 2012, it was in disarray, to say the least. But I would warn, look at your tools and do a comparison to your vulnerability management tool and what some of your other tools like SCCM are saying that are unpatched. And make sure they're aligned together. But then, like many things, don't try and boil the ocean. Start with your criticals and your exploitable vulnerabilities. And when you get that down and the system down, because a lot of times security is having to work with IT. You know, security points out the vulnerabilities, then it's IT's job to go patch the systems in many cases. So you have to form those relationships as well. But, you know, start small and then go bigger once you're able to get the criticals and the exploits down. And obviously, it's great to have, you know, SLAs in place and metrics to report in your information security committees and that. So,
yeah, the backside of that also, though, is you have to have a program to start with, right? I mean, you have to have a patching program. And then you got to know what you have before you know what to patch. Because you know how it is. I mean, you'll get an alert saying, "Oh, we have a vulnerability and it affects, you know, versions 1.7x up through, you know, blah blah blah." If you don't know what version you have, you're going to have to go and check that server. So config management, we hate that word. I did that for Lockheed Martin, and it was horrible because this was in the day before automated. So it was all Excel spreadsheets and Access databases. But it has to be done. You have to know what version you have in order to know if you've got an exploitable version. I talk about Log4j a lot because we still see companies that get exploited by Log4j, and you're like, that one's been out for a while. That patch has been out, and we were laughing about it earlier because somebody got hit with the ransomware, and they restored back to an old version that was vulnerable. It was the unpatched version of Log4j, and they got hit again.
3 times.
3 times. And I was like, and then they did it again, and I'm like, whoa. I mean, how do we define insanity? But that's the problem, is we got to really have an understanding of, I mean, when you back something up, what are you backing up? As soon as, I used to do this when I ran code. As soon as I got something to work, what's the first thing you do? Copy it, make a copy of it, right? Back it up, or take a snapshot if you're on a virtual machine. But sometimes we don't do that, and then when you restore to a backup, all those vulnerabilities. So you got to think about that.
The only thing I'll add is device inventory is critical. You got to know what's on the network, right? And you're going to be surprised what you're going to find. You're going to find legacy Windows NT systems still running out there and whatnot. You know, so really critical.
I'll add one more thing. Don't keep the encryption keys for the backups on the backup server, because, you know.
Oops. Okay, this was the final pre-submitted question. So if you've got things that you're thinking about, get ready to raise your hand. Okay, the last one. Feeling overwhelmed. So many things on the market. What technology, how do we know what technology to deploy when, where, and how to start our investment plan? Tactical, strategic, or what?
Yeah, so here's what's interesting about, when I talk to an IT manager, they're thinking tactical. They're thinking of, how do I tune my SD-WAN, or how do I tune my firewall, and they're thinking at that level. When you start talking at the executive level, the conversation usually becomes a little more strategic. Well, how do I protect all of the data across my environment? So I think it still comes back to what your vulnerabilities are. Knowing what your vulnerabilities are then answers that question. If you've got a vulnerability or something needs to be patched on a SD-WAN, then you patch the SD-WAN. You take care of that level. But when we're talking about risk and we're talking about corporate, you know, the corporate issue, it really needs to be, where am I? And from a technology standpoint, we don't know. There's 3,600 companies right now in cybersecurity, right? And part of my job is where I'm at is to vet different companies. I sit there and I talk to companies all day long, and then I'll say, well, what makes you different from that company? And some of them can't answer that question. Well, think about it from an IT standpoint. I don't know where to go. So you want to work with other people, networking. We talk about networking. What works in the same vertical? You may want to talk to an IT or an MSP company or something and say, hey, I'm looking at this, but look at the resources you already have close at hand. People and that's one reason we do these events is networking. Talk to people in your network and say, hey, I'm looking for X. You know, do you have any experience with it? Because I'll tell you, and I love my software people, but everybody's going to tell you that the greatest thing about their product, and it's not a blow against it, because in your world it may or may not work. It's not a dig against any particular product. None of our networks are green fields. Every one of our networks is unique. Every one of our networks has software and hardware that somebody else doesn't have. So something may not work very well in your world, then it works great in someone else's. So make sure you're asking the right questions of the vendor. I see this in cloud all the time. People will go out in cloud and they'll say, I want space with Windows or with Microsoft. And they'll get it, and then something will happen, and they'll say, well, I thought I bought security. No, you asked for space. You never had a security conversation. And so that you've got to make sure you're talking specifically, what do I need? What data am I storing? Is it PCI data? Is it protected data? But don't assume anything when you're doing IT conversations. Be very specific of your world and what you need.
Yeah, spot on, James. And first and foremost, look at the tools that you have in place already, and maybe you're only partially using them and not using them to their full efficacy. But also, I would take a risk-based approach. I mean, if you have a $100,000 problem, you don't want to apply $1 million worth of tools at that problem. And then look at what all the risks are and going on in your infrastructure, but also across the board. You may be able to solve 90% of your problems with just a few tools and put in better processes and more awareness of your own employees that will help a lot as well.
You can also work backwards, right? You can identify your critical assets and your critical users and ask yourself, how am I protecting them? How do I have visibility on them as well? As far as technologies and whatnot, I agree with you. Every network is different, every company is different, and things like that. But don't forget the human element, right? Security awareness, security training, really crucial, right? Start thinking of, do I have an IR plan? I think Laura and I have talked about this one. And practice it, right? Do a tabletop exercise with security team, and you're going to be surprised. They might not know what to do, right? And so the good thing about reviewing that IR, plan is to actually grow upon it, learn from it, and those type of things. And if you have a security event that happens, do a post analysis. What happened? How do we make it more efficient, and things like that. And in the process, you might actually find you have a gap. And then that's when you start to look at the market. You come to these type of events to see what could potentially meet that gap.
Yeah, incident response plans are funny when you don't test them. I had one company here in town that they went to test their plan, and ransomware event, dun-dun-dun. Step 1, turn off the internet at room whatever. So they went to that room, and the door's locked. And they're like, okay, we got to open it. Who has the key? Well, the IT manager. Where's he at? He's on a cruise. I was like, seriously? I mean, they found the error, right? They found obviously the weakness. I found others where they had people named. Talk to Joe. Well, Joe ain't been here for 2 years. So it's very, so it's role based, right? So it's title based. Not, we don't think about those things, but especially in small companies, we're like, oh, we all know each other. But when companies grow, in companies, and especially with an incident response plan that might be old. You got to make sure it's, talk to the IT manager or whatever, make sure it's very clear. Also have phone numbers in there. Who's your insurance provider? If you're going to call your insurance provider, don't make people look up the number, or we have said, like, I don't know what the local FBI office is, well, you should probably know who the local FBI, if you're calling them, just know. But these are just the things that should be automatically written in there and make it easy, because in the middle of a stressful environment, it's the worst bad day you can ever imagine. And your IT staff could just quit. I've seen that in a ransomware event where they all just quit. Yep, all 6 of them said, I'm done, and walked out. And everybody was like, so the plan could be something, I tell a story when I was in the Air Force. We did a disaster, I know, I got to tell a story. No, so when I was in the Air Force, they do these disaster drills, right? And they threw a purple smoke bomb out in front of our building. And I was like, oh, what's purple smoke bomb? Oh, we got bombed. And a guy walks in with a thing, and he goes, okay, I am the exercise coordinator. And there's 12 of us on shift. He goes, 11 of you are dead. And he points at me and says, you're the only one left alive in here. What do you do? I've only been here 2 weeks. You fail. That was it. They were like, the first thing this guy should know is where the disaster book is and how to read that disaster book and who to call. Okay. But that's what it has to be. You got to think about who could be the person that's going to turn off button X on rack Z, whatever it is. it has to be very specific, and so anybody can go in there and take care of it.
I told you these guys are super fun. I hope you really have enjoyed this. Okay, did we have extra questions that you'd like to ask the experts? Any extra questions? Okay, let me get the microphone to you. You'll have to pass it down to them.
So my question is really simple. Anyone can, from you three, it's not for like a specific person. So instead of the CISO like reporting to the CIO or CTO, why is not on the same level like everybody else? In your opinion, is that going to solve a lot of security problem?
I've argued this. I always think that, I mean, the CISO should report, in my opinion, should report directly to the board, or CEO, or someone at that level. But it's because it's a new role, it's just not there yet. Like chief risk officer is, or those aren't, you don't see those very often, but because they're new, I don't think there's a lot of love for them. So they typically report into someone else. And I think that's just going to be the way it is until, I think it's probably going to be the way it is. They want less people at the board. They really do want less true CISOs or C executives at the board. And so if I report through a CTO or CEO, then he can take my message to me. The problem is that we're seeing compliance requirements like Sarbanes-Oxley is requiring cybersecurity expertise at the board. And so more boards are actually now coming back saying, I want the CISO to come and make this report. That may give more legitimacy to the CISO role.
Trevor's next.
Oh. Were you all done?
Yeah.
Okay.
You're not leaving.
Just start.
Okay. So I was glad to hear you all make the comment about the different definitions of zero trust. So wonderful to hear and make that comment. I was going to ask you to define zero trust, but I don't want to cause any problems on the panel. So let me ask you this question. What standard should my zero trust vendor be aligned to? What industry standard should the zero trust solution be aligned? Does my question make sense?
Yes, my vote would be NIST.
Not good enough. You can't stop there. That's not good enough. You can't just stop with NIST. NIST has 3 billion standards. Give me a number.
Oh, I don't know the exact number.
Okay. We got to qualify it. But
MITRE is a good framework to align to as well.
okay.
I think that
I'm not going to get it back.
Yeah, you are.
Let me give you the cybersecurity answer. It depends. Right, there's your answer. Because the problem is it depends on, so zero trust network access is at a lower level than a zero trust access control type thing, right?
Right.
So they're all stacked up. That's the problem right now, is that zero trust depends upon if it's level 3, level 4, level 5, level 6, even level 7, and each one has a different, how it defines cybersecurity and zero trust is different depending upon how it acts out.
Well, what politicized responses I got. Anyway, thank you.
Okay, I think I had some hands up in the front. All I could do to get that microphone.
Okay, in an environment that's growing, okay, where you have a functional IT department that is employing multi-factor authentication and everything else, but they don't have an automation, capability yet. What would you suggest? Who has the responsibility to pull all that together to get a good GRC compliance going?
Depends. No kidding. Here's the problem. How do I define it? If what I'm doing isn't broken, how do I define that return on investment to up my channel? And that's the problem we see with automation, AI, machine learning is that when you say make it better, how do I define make it better? Faster? Do I make it? So one of the things that we sell is service center type stuff. And service center is a big, 80% of people don't ever want to talk to somebody. That's why Walmart lets us check ourselves out now, right? Because people don't want to talk to people, even though people complain about it. It's the same with when they go to your website or they call in. Most people would prefer to never talk to a real person and this to take care of all my issues. That's where the value of automation comes in, is the ability to actually really process, and then you're going through 15 different things in the phone. Service center, customer service. That's the problem, is it has to add value to your customer. Company, not to your IT people. At the end of the day, by selling something to, I got to make their experience. In IT management, that's the key that we have to point at. How do I make that experience better?
I think I had some hands on this side. Okay.
So it looks, I'm really new to to the OT space, but it's kind of opening my eyes that OT is literally everywhere. It goes, the grocery store you go in and the refrigeration systems, HVAC, badge readers that we have, it's literally everywhere, but people will tell you we don't have it at our company. Where should it sit? Where, knowing that we do have the controls that are in place, it's like going back to 1995. Who should own it?
I just had this conversation today at a customer meeting. Think about phone systems. Phone systems used to be facilities,
Last one.
but now it's part of the network. Therefore, it should be part of the IT staff. Who's responsible for controlling the network and controlling the security on the network? It's my IT guys. Therefore, it's part of my asset management program. I need to know everything that touches the network, and then why is it touching the network? Because it needs to use something on my network, right? So therefore, you're going to hold me responsible for it. Because if it accesses the internet and then all of a sudden this video camera turns into a rogue video camera and starts trying to DDoS my network, you're going to come to me. Therefore, if it touches my network and I'm responsible for its services, it's something I should be responsible for maintaining. And so what I would say is that I should have an asset management. Shadow IT needs to die. There shouldn't be shadow IT in our environments. I should have an asset management tool that lets me see everything that touches my network. And then if it ain't something I know about, off. Because otherwise that's a rogue,
We cannot do that, though, in OT.
I know, OT you can't. OT is the one weird world, because OT, the decisions, I used to say this when I did oil and gas presentations, and they don't let me go to them anymore. But I said, OT networks, the decision on OT is in the operating room. The argument about OT is in the operation room, because they're going to say I can't do anything with it, and I can only use MS-DOS to upgrade it, because it's so old. And most of those OT environments, they're never going to let you take it. It works. Don't touch it. And don't patch it. I don't want to see a patch, only when I need to. And so OT, what I've always said is I think OT should be on a separate network. I think OT should be segregated and managed in a totally different world. And at that time, it's ops.
So
It's always been that way.
It's always segmented. However, they're starting to want automation. They want reporting.
Sure.
So they're getting out to the internet. So even though
If you want something from me, I want something from you. Now they're asking for a service. Now you're going to have to let me patch that. You're going to make me responsible. I get to patch it.
Okay, we were allowed one more question. One more question. Are we good on this gentleman on the second floor? Okay. Ricky. Second floor. Second floor. Second row.
So with all your years of experience, one of the biggest issues is always educating your end users. What is the most effective tool you've been able to use to educate your users when it comes to cybersecurity?
Stick.
I like it.
I think the carrot. Educating the end users, what I have found to be the most effective, and this is, I've probably talked to 700 companies over the last 4 years, is the carrot. When you're doing phishing testing, you want them to report the phishing, and then what you do is at the end of each month, you reward the person who reported the most successful phishing, and you give them a $25 gift card to Starbucks. It motivates. You give them I was just talking to Southwest Airlines this morning. They give swag out. They give swag out to whoever successfully reported the most in a day. It works way better than beating people up, because if you beat them up, they won't report. So end user education, critical, but then you want an incentive program at the back end to say, hey, and if you report the most things, you get this. Or gamification. I know some companies that have done gamification where they turn it into a competition amongst different branches in the company. And if that branch reports the most, that branch gets a day off, or they get a barbecue lunch paid for by the CEO, blah, 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 whatever it is. But and it's marketing funds. It's paid for by marketing, not paid for by anything else. Pools of money.
The yearly training helps as well, but don't make it too complicated, right? Don't give them like 100, 200-page thing. So what we do is we actually have a small presentation, and that presentation is based on things we saw the previous year. So these are all live examples, right? And then you give them a short quiz, and then you move on, right? Just make it simple.
Don't pull their name up. This is what Jody did in finance.
Yeah, gamification works really well in the incentivizing, but I would also change it up. Don't just do that, but maybe you can have some kind of cybersecurity fair at your company and partner with physical security. Bring in someone from the FBI or some other person to come and speak. So a lot of educational as well.
And remember, home networks are now connected up to things too. So we've got to have a better conversation about how to secure home networks, and things you do at home have an impact on work. Just ask Cisco.
Okay, we're a wrap. I want to thank our wonderful panel, and please. And I want to thank our wonderful audience, because you were so engaged and you made it so fun. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Is this working? Yeah. James Morrison could talk to you guys until 10 o'clock at night, and I do have a 7 o'clock flight, so I am going to have to cut this off. Well, we're right across the street, thank God. But thank you all. You guys are all amazing. We're going to do our prizes now, so I'm waiting for Elena. She's going to come up with prizes, and I'm going to check and make sure that these two that just got turned in are all legit, and they are. So thank you, everyone. And if we're streaming, you can go ahead and cut the stream. They don't need to watch the prizes. So thank you to all my virtual attendees out there. There was many of them, I believe they cut the stream. Okay. All right, so we are going